It's an uncomfortable truth, but the more degrees you have, the easier it is to get robbed in broad daylight. You've spent years mastering your craft, yet when it comes to your wealth, you're still playing a game designed to make you lose. You think you're being smart by analyzing trends, but in reality, you're just paying for the privilege of being outmaneuvered by a system that thrives on your activity. What if I told you that 90% of the experts you trust are statistically certain to fail you? This isn't just about money, it's about the years of your life you're unknowingly giving away to middlemen. To truly protect your future, you need to hear this entire audiobook summary from start to finish. In the little book of common sense investing, John C. Bogle reveals why your sophisticated strategy is actually your greatest leak. Partial knowledge is more dangerous than ignorance. It gives you the confidence to make mistakes that cost a lifetime. By the end of this summary, you'll see the invisible theft happening in your portfolio and learn the one structural move that guarantees your fair share of the world's wealth. Before we dive in, I'm curious. Where are you listening from right now, and what time is it over there? Drop it in the comments. So, let's begin. Chapter 1. The game you're playing, whether you know it or not. A few years ago, I watched a friend of mine open a brokerage account for the first time. He was leaning over his laptop, eyes bright, finger hovering over the mouse. He looked less like a guy planning for retirement and more like a guy about to walk into a casino in a very expensive suit. He was convinced that he had found a play, a specific company, a specific trend that the rest of the world had somehow missed. He felt like he was playing a game of skill, like chess. He thought that if he just studied the board hard enough, he'd see the winning move. But here's the thing. Most losses begin before the first decision. The mistake he made wasn't the stock he chose. It was his fundamental misunderstanding of the room he had just walked into. We treat the stock market like this grand, chaotic theater where the loudest person wins or the smartest person outmaneuvers the crowd. We think it's a game of outsmarting the other guy. But the market isn't a game of chess. It's a giant, collective machine that mirrors the productivity of every single human being working, selling, and inventing right now. It is the pulse of business, nothing more and nothing less. When you try to play the market, you aren't actually betting on businesses. You're betting on the moods of other people, and people, as we both know, are deeply unreliable. Funny how we call it investing when we're actually just guessing which way the wind will blow tomorrow morning. The invisible rule of this game is that the market in its entirety is a winner. The people inside it, however, are usually losing. It's a strange contradiction, isn't it? The house always wins, but in this case, the house is the collective economy of the world. If you own the house, you win. If you try to bet on which room in the house will be the warmest next Tuesday, you're probably going to end up shivering. We've been conditioned to believe that complexity equals value. We think that if a strategy is difficult to understand, or if a fund manager has a degrees from 3 different Ivy League schools and wears a silk tie, they must have an edge. We want to believe in the magic of the expert because it relieves us of the terrifying realization that no one actually knows what's going to happen. But clarity isn't found in complexity. It's found in the math. Think about a professional poker game. Everyone at the table is trying to take money from everyone else. At the end of the night, the total amount of money in the room hasn't changed. It's just moved from one pocket to another. But then you realize the casino took a rake from every single hand. They took a little piece of every pot. By the time the sun comes up, the players are all poorer, and the casino is the only one that actually grew its wealth. That is the game most people are playing without realizing it. They are the players at the table, sweating over their cards, while the system itself quietly drains the pot. They're so focused on the strategy of the hand that they forget they're paying for the seat. Most people lose not because they're wrong about a company, but because they're misunderstanding the cost of being right. They think the goal is to beat the market. They don't realize that the market is already giving them everything they need, provided they stop trying to fix it. I remember sitting on a porch with an older man who had been investing since the 50s. He wasn't rich because he was a genius. He was rich because he was boring. He told me that most of his friends had spent 40 years trying to find the next big thing, jumping from tech to gold to energy, always chasing the heat. He just sat there. He bought the whole thing and went for a walk. He realized something that took me a long time to grasp. The stock market isn't a battle to be won. It's a garden to be tended. And most of us are so busy trying to rearrange the seeds every day that we never let anything actually grow. We obsess over the when and the what. We agonize over whether today is a good day to buy, or if we should wait until the news cycle calms down. We act as if our individual movements can change the gravity of the entire system. But before any strategy can work, you have to have clarity about what you are actually doing. Are you a gambler looking for a rush, or are you an owner looking for a share of the world's progress? One of those paths leads to a very quiet, very certain kind of wealth. The other leads to a lot of noise and a very empty pocket. Peace feels boring until the chaos returns. And in the world of money, the chaos always returns for those who think they can dance faster than the music. Chapter 2. When Expectations Break Reality. I was sitting in a coffee shop a few months ago and I couldn't help but overhear two guys at the next table. One of them was leaning in, voice lowered, talking about a specific tech stock like it was a religious revelation. He had these charts on his phone, glowing lines pointing straight to the moon. He wasn't talking about profit margins or cash flow, he was talking about potential. He was convinced that the world was about to change, and he had a front row seat. He looked energized. He looked like he was winning. But looking at him, I realized he wasn't actually investing. He was daydreaming with a price tag attached. Markets don't reward optimism. They reward alignment with reality. And reality is often a lot less exciting than a glowing chart on a smartphone. We have this tendency to confuse a great company with a great investment. We see a product we love, or a technology that feels like the future, and we assume that our excitement must translate into profit. But the market isn't a fan club, it's an auction house. By the time you've realized a company is amazing, chances are a million other people have realized it too, and they've already bid the price up to a point where the greatness is already paid for. You're not buying the future, you're buying what's left of the future after everyone else has taken their cut. Reality always sends the final bill. There's this quiet, cold friction between speculation and investment. Speculation feels intelligent. It feels like you're using your brain to outrun the crowd. It's the thrill of the find. But speculation is based on hope. Hope that someone else will pay more for a dream than you did. Investment, the real kind, is based on arithmetic. It's the sober realization that a business earns money, and over time you are entitled to a piece of those earnings. When your expectations outrun the actual business truth, you're standing on a trap door. Think about it like this. If you buy a farm, you're buying it for the corn and the cows. You're looking at the soil, the weather, and the yield. You don't check the price of the farm every 10 minutes to see if your neighbor thinks it's worth more today than it was at breakfast. That would be insane. But in the stock market, we do exactly that. We ignore the crops, the actual dividends and earnings of the companies, and we obsess over the price. We let the fluctuating moods of the crowd tell us if we're successful or not. We let the noise drown out the math. I've seen it happen dozens of times. A sector gets hot, expectations skyrocket, and people start paying prices that assume the company will grow at 50% every year for the next century. It's a beautiful story, but stories don't pay the bills. Earnings do. Eventually, the arithmetic quietly disagrees with the fantasy. The growth slows by a fraction of a percent, the excitement cools, and the price collapses back down to the gravity of reality. The investor who was right about the technology still loses money because they were wrong about the price. It's funny how we crave the next big thing when the current big thing is already working perfectly fine. We want the shortcut. We want the adrenaline. We've become a culture that values the hustle over the harvest. We think that if we aren't constantly adjusting, predicting, and anticipating, we're being lazy. But in the market, your activity is usually the enemy of your returns. Long-term investing collapses the moment your expectations stop being about the business and start being about the exit. If you're looking for a way out before you've even gotten in, you aren't an owner. You're a visitor. And visitors are the ones who pay for the upkeep of the house, while the owners just sit back and watch the grass grow. It's a hard pill to swallow, especially when you see someone else making a killing on a meme stock or a lucky break. It makes you feel slow. It makes you feel like you're missing the party. But those parties always end the same way, with the lights coming on and a lot of people wondering where their coat went. The real edge isn't being faster than the next guy. It's being more patient than your own impulses. It's accepting that wealth isn't a sprint. It's a slow, steady accumulation of reality. Chapter 3. The Silent Theft. No one notices. I remember visiting my grandfather's old workshop. He was a carpenter and he had this massive, industrial-grade sawdust vacuum system. One afternoon he showed me the collection bin. It was filled with fine, grey powder, pounds of it. He looked at me and said, "Every time I make a cut, the wood gets a little shorter, but the blade also turns a part of the tree into dust. If you cut the same board too many times, eventually, you don't have a board left. You just have a pile of dust." Investing is exactly like that. But in the financial world, the sawdust is invisible. Most people spend their lives obsessing over gross returns. They look at the big number at the top of the statement and feel a surge of pride. But that number is a lie. It's a ghost. The only number that actually matters, the only one that will buy your groceries or pay for your daughter's wedding, is the net return. That's what's left after the system takes its bite. What you don't see costs the most. Think about the layers. First, there's the fund manager. He's a smart guy usually. He has a team, an office in a skyscraper, and a marketing department. He charges you a small fee, maybe 1 or 2%, to manage your money. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like the price of a cup of coffee. But in the world of compounding, 2% isn't just 2% of your money. It's often 50% of your future. Over 30 years, that tiny friction, that sawdust, eats away the lion's share of your wealth. You provide 100% of the capital. You take 100% of the risk, and yet you end up handing over a massive chunk of the profit to someone who simply moved the paper around. Then there's the turnover. Every time a fund manager buys or sells a stock to beat the market, he's creating a taxable event and a transaction cost. It's more friction, more sawdust. The harder he works to prove he's worth his fee, the more he bleeds the account. It's a strange irony. In almost every other area of life, you get what you pay for. If you pay more for a car, you get a better engine. If you pay more for a steak, it tastes better. But in investing, you get exactly what you don't pay for. Every dollar you pay in fees is a dollar that isn't compounding for you. It's a dollar that's compounding for someone else's retirement. I once talked to a woman who had been in the same active mutual fund for 20 years. She was frustrated because the market had doubled, but her account felt like it was stuck in the mud. We looked at the fine print together. Between the management fees, the load fees, and the internal trading costs, she was losing nearly 3% a year. She wasn't a bad investor, she was just a victim of a very polite, very legal mugging. What funds report earning and what investors actually receive are not the same. It's the difference between a dream and a bank balance. The industry is designed to keep you focused on the dream, the outperformance, the alpha, the winning picks. They want you to look at the bright colors so you don't notice the hand in your pocket. Every unnecessary layer quietly transfers wealth away from the investor. The consultants, the brokers, the taxmen, the flashy platforms, they are all standing in line with their bowls out, waiting for their share of your hard work. It's funny how we'll drive across town to save 10 cents on a gallon of gas, but we'll casually sign a document that gives away 6 figures of our lifetime earnings to a middleman we've never met. We've been trained to believe that expert help must be worth the cost. But in the stock market, the most expert thing you can do is eliminate the experts. The math of the market is brutal and honest. The gross return of the market minus the cost of the system equals what the investors get. If the market returns 7% and the system takes 2%, you get 5%. It doesn't matter how many spreadsheets the manager shows you. It doesn't matter how confident he sounds on TV. You have to be the guardian of your own arithmetic. You have to realize that the less you pay to play, the more you win. It sounds cynical, maybe even a little cold, but it's the most empowering truth there is. You don't need a better strategy. You just need a cheaper one. Funny how peace feels boring. Until you realize that the excitement was just the sound of your money disappearing. Chapter 4. Why smart choices still fail. I once knew a guy who spent 6 months researching the perfect dishwasher. He read the forums, compared the decibel levels, and studied the energy ratings until he could recite the manual by heart. He made an incredibly smart choice, and for 2 years, it was great. Then a random power surge during a summer storm fried the control board, and the whole thing became a very expensive drying rack. In life, we're taught that effort correlates with outcome. If you study harder, you get the grade. If you work longer, you get the promotion. But the market has a funny way of punishing that kind of logic. In this arena, complexity creates confidence, not better outcomes. Was it skill or just luck? It's a question that keeps fund managers up at night, though they'd never admit it to you. We love a winner. When we see a mutual fund that has beaten the market 3 years in a row, our brains are hardwired to see a pattern. We think we've found a master. We tell ourselves that this person has a system or an insight that the rest of the world lacks. So, we move our money there, feeling clever, feeling like we've finally cracked the code. But chasing winners feels rational until randomness tells a different story. The math of the universe has this annoying habit called regression to the mean. It's a fancy way of saying that if you flip a coin and get heads 5 times in a row, you haven't discovered a secret way to flip heads. You've just experienced a statistical streak. Eventually, the tails are coming. In the investment world, today's star performer is almost always tomorrow's mediocre memory. Past success seduces investors into repeating future mistakes. We buy what was hot yesterday, hoping it stays hot tomorrow, forgetting that the very act of everyone buying into it is usually what cools it down. I remember watching a panel of experts on a financial news network. They were all wearing sharp suits, talking in rapid-fire jargon about moving averages, and resistance levels. They sounded like physicists. If you listened closely, you'd realize they all disagreed with each other, but they all sounded equally certain. It reminded me of those people who try to predict the weather by looking at the shape of the clouds. It looks like science. It feels like work. But at the end of the day, the wind does what the wind wants to do. We crave complexity because it makes us feel like we have control. If the solution is simple, like just buying the whole market and sitting still, it feels too easy. It feels like we're leaving money on the table. We think, surely someone as smart as me can do better than average. But in the market, average isn't a C grade. Because of the costs and the failures of the smart players, the person who simply accepts the market's return ends up finishing ahead of about 90% of the people who tried to be brilliant. I once met a surgeon who was a brilliant man. He saved lives for a living. But he was a terrible investor. Why? Because he couldn't accept that his intelligence didn't give him an edge in the market. He applied the same intensity to his portfolio that he applied to the operating table. He was constantly adjusting, optimizing, and reacting. He didn't realize that the market is one of the few places where the more you use your brain, the more you tend to lose your shirt. The smartest choice you can make is often the one that feels the most humble. It's admitting that you don't know which stock will win. It's admitting that you can't predict the next recession. It's letting go of the need to be right so that you can focus on being successful. It's funny how we spend so much time trying to find the needle in the haystack when we could just buy the whole damn haystack and be done with it. We've been sold a story that we need to be hunters. We need to be aggressive. We need to capture returns. But the most resilient wealth doesn't come from hunting. It comes from staying out of the way of your own ego. Funny how peace feels boring until you realize that your smart choices were just a very complicated way of standing in your own light. Chapter 5. The power of owning everything and doing nothing. I was walking through a park a few weeks ago and saw an old man sitting on a bench, just watching the ducks. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't checking his watch. He just looked settled. I found myself feeling almost envious. In a world that demands we always be on, always optimizing, always pivoting, there is something deeply radical about a person who is capable of sitting still. In the world of money, we've been told that stillness is laziness. We've been told that if we aren't trading, rebalancing, or hunting for the next edge, we're falling behind. But the real edge, the one that actually builds empires, isn't brilliance. It's structural intelligence. Stillness beats brilliance over time. Think about what it means to own the whole market. It means you've stopped trying to guess which runner will win the race, and you've decided to simply own the track. You've removed your ego from the equation. You've stopped pretending you have a crystal ball. By owning everything, you've quietly accepted a truth that most people spend their whole lives fighting. The system works, provided you don't get in its way. Simplicity isn't a lack of sophistication, it's the ultimate form of it. When you own an index of the entire economy, you are betting on human ingenuity. You're betting that tomorrow people will still want to solve problems, buy things, and build lives. And as long as they do, the companies they work for will create value. You don't need to know which company will do it best. You just need to be there to collect your fair share of the result. The real challenge isn't the math. The math is easy. The real challenge is the person in the mirror. We are wired for drama. We are wired to react to the breaking news and the market crashes. We feel like we have to do something when the world gets loud. But every time you react, you break the chain of compounding. Every time you move, you pay the sawdust fee we talked about earlier. The hardest thing in the world is to do nothing when everyone around you is panicking, or worse, when everyone around you is getting rich on a trend you didn't buy into. I think back to my friend with the laptop, the one who wanted to play the game. He's still playing. He's had some big wins, sure, but he's also had some crushing losses, and he's spent thousands of hours staring at flickering red and green numbers, stressed and exhausted. Meanwhile, that boring old man on the porch, he's wealthier than all of us, simply because he let time do the heavy lifting. Patience is the only commodity the market doesn't know how to price, which is why it's the only thing that consistently pays off. We spend our lives trying to outsmart the system, forgetting that we are the system. When you own the whole market, you aren't fighting against the world anymore. You're walking with it. You're letting the collective energy of millions of workers and dreamers carry you toward your goals, while you go about the business of actually living your life. There's a quiet dignity in that. A freedom that comes from knowing you've already won the game because you've stopped playing by the house's rules. Funny how we spend so much energy trying to master our money, only to realize the real work was always about mastering ourselves. It makes me wonder, if you stopped worrying about beating everyone else, what would you actually do with all that extra headspace? I'd love to hear what that stillness looks like for you. Is there a part of your life where you finally stopped chasing and just started being? Drop a thought in the comments. It's nice to know who's out there listening. If this conversation sat well with you, maybe stick around for the next one. It helps more than you know. Take it easy.